Right, good morning. How is everyone? You can do better than that. Good morning. Everybody's still hydrated? No casualties? Nobody's going to go to sleep in the middle of class or anything? Or you already did that at 8? Yeah. No guarantees. Well, you know, it's a programming class, so gee, that's guaranteed to be lively, right? Programming classes have to be one of the most lively things you're going to take at AU. So anyway, good morning. My name's Robert Green, and most people kind of tend to know me from my CAD management stuff, but one of my dirty little secrets is that the way I became a CAD manager is I learned how to program and kind of evolved into it. So I always really enjoyed doing some AutoLISP-focused material at Autodesk University. So is everybody here a CAD manager, by show of hands? Pretty much, or the power user who functions as one without the title, authority, paycheck, etc. I find myself struggling with where to be, so I'm not blocking anyone's view here. Yeah, basically, my philosophy about jumping into AutoLISP is that it is basically a manager's dream tool. From the standpoint of controlling AutoCAD-based tools, most of us across networks, wide area networks, maybe even branch offices, we have all these challenges of trying to get everybody running on singing from the same sheet of music, as it were, and trying to get everything consistently configured. And there's really nothing I know of that does it better than AutoLISP. How many of you have a working knowledge of AutoLISP already before you walk into the room? It's fairly high. How many of you have kind of tried to fiddle with it but haven't been happy with where you've wound up? Okay. So we're kind of going to do a mixture of things in here. Some of it you may have seen, but I'm trying to put a spin on it that's definitely management focused. So even if you already kind of know what you're doing, you may pick up a few things that you didn't already know. That's the hope anyway. So let's just go ahead and kind of start at the beginning. LIST actually stands for list processors because everything is embedded in parenthetical lists. So how many of you are aware of things like car and cadder and functions like that? Yeah, okay, so we got a few lispers in the room. It kind of made sense when AutoCAD was in its infancy, because if you think about it, what kind of information is really stored inside of a CAD database? Points, which are pretty much 3-element lists if you think about it. So, there it was. This was way before Visual Basic, all that. It started, coming out, and everything was in DOS at this point. So I kind of invariably will get the question, well, should we even still be using this? And my answer to that is a definitive yes, because it's simple to use. Number of reasons. It's very valid because so much of it's out there, I would say, would probably be the number one thing. What do you think would happen if Autodesk tried to turn off the Lisp interpreter? Yeah. I would actually love to see how many millions of dollars have been invested in AutoLISP code. Over the lifespan of this tool. So, the stuff's out there. It's not going away. There's a lot of freeware, shareware, low-cost utilities. And the bottom line for me is it does a lot of things a lot easier than a compiled language. Like over the years, did a lot of VB6 stuff and, various different flavors of that. I mean, I can do something in one line of plain ASCII code. I don't have to compile it. It's dirt cheap. All you really need to use it is a copy of AutoCAD and Notepad. And the cost of entry doesn't get any lower than that as far as I'm concerned. It is fantastic for controlling AutoCAD configurations, which is a big part of what we want to talk about in here today. And you don't have to know a real big subset of the language in order to get some truly great efficiency. So what I want to try and do is just focus on the slice of the language that I find most useful for controlling, in a CAD management, from a CAD management point of view, and how I use it to control the tools. So what I want to do for a moment is just kind of lay out some of the standard files that are out there, where they reside, some rules of the road, and I'm going to suggest a procedure. Now, it doesn't mean you have to follow my suggestion, but I'm just going to throw it out there. Okay? If you look at the support directory on your machine, you're going to go in there and you are going to find some Lisp files that are named like these, where the XX just denotes the version, 12, 13, 14, whatever it is that you're using. These files are automatically loaded as AutoCAD starts up. Now, what order do they load in? They load in that order. Some of these files have code in it. Some don't. Some are actually just created by you, and we're going to use one of them to put our code in a moment. My rule of thumb is the AutoCAD 2014 LSP and 2014 Doc LSP, since they have code in them, is that a good thing to be messing with? Not in my opinion. If you choose to do it, you've been warned, right? At least back the file up before you mess with it, I would say. Now, the AutoCAD LSP and the AutoCAD Doc LSP, those are basically ours to do with as we choose. Now, the one that I like to use for my programming is the AutoCAD Doc LSP. The reason why I do that is because it is where in the load order? Last. So if I screw something up in my code, what do I do to the rest of the system? Nothing. So a lot of times I'll get people say, well, why are you insistent on using the AutoCAD Doc LSP file? That's why. Because it's going to automatically load for me, and it's the place I can put my stuff that has the least potential to do damage. Now, do you think I've come to that conclusion because I've done damage? Yes. There's also a file that kind of got lost somewhere in the last few versions, but there's an MNL file. If that is named the same as your CUI, that file will load. So it's actually a LSP file type. It has AutoLISP code in it, but it will only load with its companion CUI. So if you have bozo.cuix, it would load bozo.mnl if it finds it. This can sometimes be useful if you have discipline-specific CUIs. I'll leave that to you. The AutoCAD Doc LSP is a more global file. It's going to load whenever AutoCAD starts. And it's going to load on every drawing session start. So, to recap, these files, some of them have code in it, should not be tampered with. The AutoCAD Doc LSP is ours. It resides in the support level folder. Therefore, AutoCAD finds it when it starts and auto-loads it for you. The auto-load behavior is what I like to take advantage of rather than, say, using Startup Suite, because I don't have to code anything in order for this to work. Have any of you ever had one of your users screw up their Startup Suite settings? How fun's that to debug over a 1,200-mile distance? All right. I'm a big believer in keep it simple. So what I'm just going to do is start putting my code in that AutoCAD Doc LSP file. Every time AutoCAD comes up or starts a new drawing session, it'll load it for me, and I'm just going to hack away at the code, and try it. So basically, here's what you have to do. Everybody's been in AutoCAD and seen the options screen before, I presume. You go to the Files tab, you look at where your support folders are, and typically, straight out of the box, you're going to see something like this. It's a user's profile-specific directory as opposed to something more global, like a network drive. So if you wanted to get an AutoCAD Doc LSP onto this user's machine, where would you have to go? Their machine. Somehow, some way. Logged in as them. My preference, if I can pull it off, is to add a network folder into the support paths such that I can load the AutoCAD Doc LSP across the network. Now, do I have to make a trip to the user's machine to do this the first time? Yes, but after that, how often do I have to go to their machine? Unless they mess up the profile. So we'll talk about some of that in here today too. Take note, when you add the network path, just because you add the network path, you're not done. You need to bump it all the way up to the top of the sort order, correct? To force the machine to go there first. Otherwise, it could be loading AutoCAD Doc from any one of these other files, directories, rather, and it would get to yours last. So it's going to bump down through the search order. It's going to find the first AutoCAD Doc LSP, load it, done. So our network folder needs to go to the top of the stack. What I would suggest that you do, and this, I just do this, is when I create my AutoCAD doc LSP, I put a prompt statement in there just so it'll spit out at the command line so I actually know that it loaded. You don't have to do it. The other thing that I'll tend to do is as I load my code into this file, I tend to push that prompt statement down to the bottom so that I know that it hit my file, evaluated my code, and actually got to the bottom of the file. So after AutoCAD starts, I just hit my F2 command history. I have evidence that it actually occurred. How many of you have ever saved an AutoCAD Lisp file and got a .lisp.txt file type behind it, which then wouldn't load? Okay. A lot of you may not use Notepad. I just want to point out that when you're saving it with Notepad, make sure that you put a .lsp behind it. Otherwise, it'll kind of tend to put a .txt behind it. Now, alternately, you can obviously load files manually through the app load interface, and there's nothing wrong with doing that. And you can use the startup suite to automatically load selections of files if you'd like to, and there's nothing wrong with that either. My only criticism, though, is that that startup suite is stored on the user's machine. So if it becomes corrupted or the user messes with it, it means I have to walk over to that machine again. Are you already getting the idea that I don't like having to walk over to users' machines? Self-defense, right? Otherwise, you walk around all day with a memory stick and you never get anything done. Now, what I have done, and I'll show you an example on this later, is I've kind of come up with a standard AutoCAD doc LSP file that kind of serves as a skeleton or a starting point for almost any kind of network that I set up. And I just have certain things in it, and I'm going to kind of go through those in the sequence that I load them in. I'm going to follow along. If you've brought the handout or you're looking at it, on your iPad or whatever, I'm basically going to follow along the same way that the handout is sequenced. So you shouldn't really have to worry about writing anything down. Just kind of look at the code and get the hang of it as you go along. So the first thing that I do is I take a look at any kind of variable or command default behavior that I want to control. Here's just kind of a simple starting example. You could take any system variable and set it through Lisp like that. So the next time the user uses the FillIt command, what radius are they going to get? 0.25. That's probably not something I'd actually do, but it illustrates the concept. Now here's maybe something that I might actually do. You ever wish you could turn off all those "are you sure" type of prompts? Well, if you set the expert variable up to 5, that will tend to suppress those prompts. So I do, at least on my own machine, I tend to do that. Let's say you wanted to make sure the current dim style was set in a particular way. That's how you do that. Now I want to see whether people are already connecting the dots. The user starts their machine. They load the customized AutoCAD doc LSP file that I've put there for them or across on a network directory. And as it loads, these type of commands are executed. What am I doing to this user? I'm standardizing them. Even if they try to not use that dim style, what's going to happen the very next time they start a drawing session? Here's another thing I use it for. Even if the user isn't abusing the privilege, maybe you've got an old template file that had a dimension style set correctly 2 years ago, but it's not set correctly anymore, but that thing's still out there floating around, isn't it? You guys ever have this problem? Old files perpetrating old standards? Well, now, instead of trusting the user to reset that or making sure that they have the new template file, how can I control the current dimension style? Just like that. Make sense? I find this to be a very valuable way to control it. Yes? If it doesn't exist, you're just going to get an error. It's going to error out. Yeah, that line. Nothing fatal. No smoke will come out of the machine or anything. Yes? It loads after the drawings in memory. Yep. You could, yeah. Now, anything that I can do at a command line, I can also do as AutoCAD starts. And this is, I can also do this within Lisp functions, which is where we'll go next. So, jagged circles, jagged polylines. You know, trying to get rid of that user question, why do my circles look jagged? Well, it's the view res setting. Now you got to explain it. Well, why not just set view resolution to 5000 every time it starts? There's an example for that. How did I know the flow of that? Well, you go to the command line and you type in view res, and what does it ask you? Okay. Would you like to set your view resolution settings? Yes. What number would you like? Anywhere from 1 to 20,000, and I've responded with 5,000. So literally what you type is inside quote marks. If you wanted to hit an extra enter, what would that look like? Actually, it would just be 2 quote marks. Think of the quote marks as being the enter, right? View res, enter. Y, enter. 5,000, enter. So hitting the enter bar would be just quotes. Functionally equivalent to a space unless you're in a text command that evaluates a space bar as a space. So here's another one. Make sure the color is set to by layer. Make sure the line type is set to by layer. Can you tell I work around MicroStation users? Those of you who laugh know exactly what I'm talking about. Just make sure that stuff's set correctly. Why the dash in front of the color and the line type? Yes, because if you type in just plain color, you're going to get a dialog box. But if you type in dash color, it pops out at the command line. And now we're back to AutoCAD 2.52, the way God meant it to be, right? Yeah, at the command line. How would I load in a menu? Like that. Notice that's not menu load, it's just plain menu. That loads the entire CUI file in. This is not rocket science, and you can definitely just kind of use this as a template for any command that you'd like to drive as AutoCAD starts up. But again, what am I doing to this user? I'm making sure that their operating environment is standard. Not so bad. Some other things that you can do, which we will be utilizing in some functions, is to set some global variables that may be handy for you to have later. Like, what's the username of the person that's on this machine? So here I'm establishing a variable called username, and I'm setting it equal, set Q, to my name. Here's another way we could do something like that. We could set a variable that might contain a useful path where we might want to go and load files later. So this can be done globally as the machine starts up. Straightforward enough. Now what I want to do is start taking some of this stuff we just looked at and start building some functions out of it so that we can actually control not only how the machine boots and starts, but I want to control AutoCAD's command environment. Have you ever wished you could just get people to quit exploding stuff? You ever wished you could make them do things in a certain way? That's where we're going next. Okay. What I want to do is approach my user community, and I want to ask them for things that are keystroke intensive, things that bother them, things that take them 4 or 5 different steps, and I'm going to say, would it help you if I did a little function or something for you so you could just key in a couple of characters and it would just happen? And they're going to say yes, and they're probably going to tell you a few things they wish you would solve. We can turn those into command level functions, and it's just like adding a new command to AutoCAD. We're actually not, technically speaking, but as far as the user is concerned, we really kind of are. So here's an example where I usually always start. It's straightforward enough. Just note that in order to define a function, defun, you have to have a certain few things on that top line. The first thing that I have to do is define the function itself, ZA, and it has a C colon in front of it, so it will be what kind of function? Command function, accessible at the command line. So the user would simply type in what? ZA. And what would happen? Yeah, the zoom all would occur. Now, is anyone going to say, well, you know, I can go to the PGP file and I could have done that? No, not exactly. You could go to the PGP file and you could make Z equals zoom, but you can't initiate a command and then pass other things into it. Right? So here what I've been able to do is initiate the zoom command and then pass the A is for all back into it. Now what I've done, and I guess I actually probably should have put it up there, but right after that first line where I say command zoom all, I do another one that says command zoom dot 95x, which gives you just a little bit of space around the outside of the extents of the drawing. So that's, I don't know, that's just one that I use. It always bothers me that I can't select right around the perimeter of the working area. It's like just a little dead space there. So you can just kind of tweak with it and play with it. As far as the user is concerned, they've now got what? A ZA command. They don't know that it's not a native part of AutoCAD. They just know that they can use it. So you just take that code and you put it in your ACAD doc LSP file and save it. And the next time AutoCAD starts, what command's available? ZA. I know some of you know this. So let's go ahead and move on to a couple other ideas that may be a little bit more involved. So a person that I was actually working with at a client company was complaining, and he said, you know, I just noticed that our drawings get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and this is because nobody ever purges the blocks out of their drawings. And when he said nobody ever purges the blocks, there was a certain expletive between purge and block that was uttered, which I have spared you. But there was some frustration there. So the idea was to give the users a quick, easy-to-use little keystroke that would make it easy for them to purge. This required us to go do a little bit of research into the -purge command, which is the command line version of it, and figure out how we would make a quick little keystroke. So we decided to call it ATP for AutoPurge. We invoke the command line, -purge. Purge says, what would you like to purge? A is for all available data types. It then asks you for a naming criteria. So I have replied with wildcard, or all of them. It then says, would you like to review the objects one by one as they are purged? And I reply to that, no, because the title of the function is AutoPurge, not manual purge, right? So I wanted to just rip through this and do it. At the very end, I tack on a save instruction. QSave is actually the little floppy that you hit 1,000,000 times a day, or Control S. Yeah, I think to myself, do I want to do that again? No, save. We put that in place, and some people started trying to use it, and the complaint was, hey, this is blowing away some of my empty layers, which I really didn't want blown away, so we refined the function to only purge blocks. Do you see how I did that? B is for blocks. Same approach. Here's a really cool little fact. If you go to the regular purge command that comes up with a dialog box, it cannot purge registered apps, but -purge can. So the things that trip object enablers and all that stuff when you send drawings around to other people that don't have the same vertical apps as you could actually put one of those, the purge for registered app call in your AutoPurge and blow those things away. I'm a big fan of doing something like this before you ever send a drawing anywhere, just to get it as flattened, as squished down as possible. So we put this out there, and the users who didn't purge their drawings in the first place are now the users who don't use this. So we put the command in place, but it didn't really seem to do anything. Hold that thought, because we're going to get to a way to deal with that in a little while. Here's a couple more examples, just so that you can see it's consistent. Now you can execute multiple commands inside of one keystroke function. Really about the only thing you can do to get sideways here, I mean, you can make a syntax error, obviously that's a problem, but kind of the only thing you can do to get in trouble is to try and name it something that already exists. Like if you define C:"line, what's going to happen? It'll actually let you do it, but your line command will be subordinate to the real line command. So yeah, congratulations, you've now stored a function you can't use. Okay? So just don't name your functions the same thing as an AutoCAD command unless you take a particular set of actions, which is where we're going to go next. This is a pretty cool little example. Even some of you guys who've done some coding before may pick up something in this one. What we wanted to do was to make an easy routine where you could basically fill it off sharp corners. But every time people would go into the FillIt, they'd forget that their radius was set, and they'd expect sharp corners, and they'd get a rounded corner. So we made a little shortcut called FZ. This is using a set var, right here, to make sure that the FillIt radius is set to 0. I then invoke the FillIt command, and what do I have to do twice? Wait for user input, right? So the pause is a system reserved function. All it does is pause input at the command line and waits for the user. So the great news is you can write functions that take input from your user. What's the bad news? You're taking input from the user. I took the words right out of my mouth. What can the user possibly do? Yeah, they can give you bad input. So, FillIt, I don't really worry about that too much. Everybody kind of knows what they have to do. And the FillIt command itself would handle any of the erroring, right? If they pick wrong entities or whatever, the FillIt command is going to spit out the appropriate error messaging. So I don't really worry about this too awful much. But what I have done here that's not good technique is I have set a system variable. I don't know how it was set before. It's good technique that if you're going to change a system variable, you should put it back the way you found it. Make sense? So here's what that code looks like. And this is just kind of it's a standard approach I use. What I do is I always name the variable old underbar, then whatever the system variable was in the first place. So I set the old FillIt rad to whatever it is now by using a get var. Incidentally, for those of you who haven't really done a whole lot of Lisp, there's two sets of parentheses there. Which one gets evaluated first? The innermost, and you work your way out. So the very first thing that would occur here, two sets of parents, so there's two functions occurring. The first thing would be a get var of the current FillIt radius. The second thing would be a set equal of whatever it read into a variable name that you've defined. So now this variable name, old FillIt rad, is just sitting out there and available. Until you do what? Until you close. Yeah, as soon as the memory space of that drawing is gone, that variable's gone. But it's just sitting there waiting for you at this point. Then I go ahead and set my FillIt radius to 0, execute the FillIt, and then I set var FillIt rad to the old value that I stored up here. Close the program out. Everything's back the way I found it. That's a nice, clean little program. So kind of the rule of thumb is any system variable that you're going to affect should have a line that looks kind of like that first, and as you leave the program, it should have a line that looks kind of like that on the way out. And sometimes system variables kind of lurk in functions that you may not suspect. Like what if the user's in the FillIt command and does a radius set manually? What's going to happen to that system variable? Yeah, it's going to get changed. So I'm going to put it back. I don't know. I can't write a perfect routine. But that pretty much covers it. So I've now been able to kind of deploy some pretty cool little shortcut things to my users fairly easily. One little trick that I like to use, and I've had to use this on a number of occasions at different sites, is the ability to call outside programs from a Lisp expression. Here's a simple example. AutoCAD has already reserved a function that calls your currently registered internet browser. They've done the shortcut for you. So you can simply call it from the command line, right? Browser, and then whatever HTML file or any file that the browser can open logically and display, then goes there. Do you see a way to deliver help files now? Okay? Pretty straightforward. Just crunch your, what I do is I just develop them in Word and then HTML them out, and then have little help document buttons, up in the ribbon space or wherever, however we like to do it. And the code that's behind that button is just essentially that. Now, what if you want to call another externally referenced program that AutoCAD doesn't know about? Well, here's an example where you could start any program in any folder. And the magic function there is start app. From functions, here's how that might look. Now, the first example that I've done up there is to start Notepad. So I've now got a shortcut NP that calls Notepad. Why do I not have to have a folder or pathing in front of the Notepad exe file? It's already a system registered executable, correct? So Windows knows where it is. So all you have to do is just call the executable and it pops up. But I write lots of utility programs that are not registered Windows apps. We just write them as little monolithic EXEs for database pinging or whatever it is that I need to do. In that particular case, I would have to include some sort of a path argument so that the function actually knows where the exe file resides. So one particular place I work at, we have a bunch of pre-done queries that report back certain database reports for the user, and we've got it all defined so they can just key in little shortcuts, and they have no clue that they're going out and hitting the external database and getting a report back. They just know that they typed RP. And that's the trick that I use to do it. Oh, is there a way to know which programs the system knows about? Generally, if you go into your control panel and you search through and look at any known registered file types, you'll see like TXT, and it'll show you that the Notepad is registered against that, and that's pretty good indication that that one's, yeah. Or you could take the approach that I usually use if I'm too lazy to look it up. I just try writing the function that way. And if it doesn't find it, it's probably not registered. Then I put a path on it. Okay, so what we can now do is add a variety of different commands to ease our user's life, and we can actually ping external EXEs if we need to. Really can't state how dry it is out here, can you? What I now want to do is take control of AutoCAD's command vocabulary, and we have almost everything that we need to do it. First things first, you can turn off a command via AutoLISP by simply undefining it. Now there's a couple of examples. Now I probably would not want to turn off the line command. That might not be funny. But you could turn off the explode command. Right? We're a civil engineering firm. We use P-lines, not lines. Maybe you do want to turn the line command off. When I undefine a command, like line, the user types in line, what happens? Nothing. The user types in L, which is short for line, what happens? Nothing. User hits a toolbar with the line command behind it. Nothing. They hit a ribbon element. Nothing. Okay, it is just as if it vanished. Gone. So if you don't want people using a specific command, I would just say simply turn it off. And when I started doing this, I remember specifically, it was when Release 10 came out, and they had all these cool little programs like Taurus was one of them, and Cone was another. And I'd see my guys who were supposed to be doing P&ID work sitting there playing with Tauruses and donuts and cones. So I just turned them off. Easy enough. Now, have you noticed that in several of my examples that before any command I always tended to put a dot in front of it? Nobody asked, but if you think back, I do it, and in fact, you can even see examples of it there. So why am I doing that? Well, if you undefine a command and you type in line and it doesn't work, you type in L and it doesn't work, you hit a button and it doesn't work, but if you type in dot L-I-N-E, it does work. Here comes the joke. That stays in Vegas, correct? Yes. Just to let you know. Okay? Yes. Yes. Let me go back there. His question was, is there a difference between the dot that I put here and sometimes you tend to see underlines in front of stuff? The underline is actually called the language localizer. So that if you write a program that has a certain command in the English vocabulary set, you can now ship that program over, and if you say underbar undefined, it would work, say, on the Japanese version of AutoCAD, even though that's not a command that that program recognizes per se. So if you have to do stuff globally, if you work a lot in South American, you work in a Portuguese version or whatever, that may be of note to you. But yeah, it's different animal. Okay, so what I'm now going to do is look at commands that have been undefined and look at clever ways that I can redefine them to make it handy for me. So you now know how to add commands to the command set, right? ZA, ATP. You know how to take commands away from the command set, which we just looked at. Now let's say, how could we bring a command back? Well, we could redefine it like that. What happens if your users figure out that they can redefine a command? Oh man, he's turned off the line command. Well, I'll just redefine it, right? So what does the savvy CAD manager do? He undefines redefine. It works. It works. You can undefine undefined, yes, but you could always type dot in front of it, so it's kind of academic. Most users, I find now, are so reliant on either short keystrokes or graphical modes of input that nobody's really typing long stuff down in the command bar anymore. So for the most part, even though that dot doesn't give you bulletproof security, in actuality, it seems to pretty much do the job. What I now want to do is combine functions with the undefining logic that we've looked at to make commands behave just the way I want them to behave. I'm going to introduce one function in this next thing that we'll look at, which is called alert. I tend to use this more and more now because the command prompt is, over the years kind of shrunk and gone sideways and gotten translucent and all these different things. You can't necessarily guarantee that people are reading what comes out in the command line anymore. But if you pipe it through an alert function like that, they kind of have to see it, because it goes up on the screen and they acknowledge it. Don't overdo this. It's annoying, right? Don't you love programs that put 50 of those "Are you sure" boxes in front of you? I don't like them either. So don't overdo it, but there it is. So look at what I'm doing now, and let's trace this out. So a couple of quiz questions here for you. If I had simply defined the torus function here, what would have happened? The normal version of torus would come up. I would have a C:torus function in memory, but which one would take precedence? AutoCAD's native command would take precedence. But by undefining the torus command here, then redefining, which one wins? Now mine wins. So now the user goes and hits the torus icon on a ribbon element. What happens? The alert box pops up. If they don't know about the dot, it's checkmate, right? I've got full control of it. The compelling thing for me about looking at this, and it's why I like to walk CAD managers through it, is that I can completely control AutoCAD's command set. I can add to it. I can subtract from it. I can make commands act the way I want them to act. Remember the purge example before? What am I doing here? I am infecting the save command with purge logic. It's exactly what I'm doing. So I have turned off the default QSave. I've built my own QSave. So whenever they click the save icon, or Control S, or however it is they like to initiate their save, the first thing that's going to happen is the blocks are going to get purged out of it. Then the actual file save operation will occur. Question, is it crucial that that dot be right there? Let's go with the democratic process. How many think that it is crucial that the dot should be there? How many don't think that it should be there, or doesn't have to? Very little. Consensus, about 40% of the people don't vote. Yeah, that's about right. Okay. Yeah, it has to be there because why? Because I turned it off up here. Right. So, yeah, it's off there. And now, if it weren't there, something very interesting would actually transpire. A loop. Because it would be trying to call my modified QSave command at the command line, and it would just kind of get stuck in an infinite purge loop until you figured out to escape out of it. Now, how do you think I know that? Has anyone in this room ever written a program that just worked perfect right out of the gates? I haven't. Does this make sense? Do you see how you can control the AutoCAD tool very effectively this way? Most CAD managers aren't doing this. Even though they know these techniques, they're not controlling the command set. Last thing is, once you get your functions working, I highly advocate that you set the command echoing mode on and off so that as the user uses your function, they don't see the evidence of your function spilling out at the command line. If this guy uses the QSave like this and hits his F2 command history box, he's going to say, wait a minute, why am I getting all these purge messages? Wait a minute, what's going on? But if I put command echo in it like this, turning it off, executing my code, turning it back on, then the user will have no visual, no command line evidence that anything transpired. Now, the day that we deployed this is honest to God truth, not kidding, funny as hell. So we're sitting there, and we put it out on the global ACAD doc LSP. So people come in the morning, and they're getting this on their machine, right? So their QSave has now been infected with purge. Within about 30 minutes, the phone starts to ring. Is something wrong with the network? Every time I save my file, it's really slow. Think about what's going on. And then by about noon, I don't know, it must have just been a temporary network problem, because every time I save now, it's fast like it should be. That's pretty amusing, isn't it? They're being standardized, and they don't even know they're being standardized. A couple more things. In the next section of my kind of standard startup routine, what I will do is make sure that we load in whatever our standard CUI, menu architecture, should be. It's standard for a reason, right? So I'm going to go ahead and load it when we come in. If you'd like to set to a specific standardized workspace, you can do it that way. Note the dash in front of the workspace. And the only thing that you have to make sure of is what on both of these examples? That the file and the workspace actually exist. If they don't, that line of code will just kind of, couldn't find it. It'll just go on to the next one. But I'm going to presume that you wouldn't put it in there if it didn't exist. Now, how many of you have truly competent power users whom you trust, and you have no problem with them having their own CUI and Lisp code? I see them all the time. They're not the ones who mess things up, right? They're competent users, And I'm really going hardcore on this standardizing here, aren't I? Every time they open the drawing, I'm switching their menu, I'm overloading any system variables that they may have had set. They may have a valid reason why they need it to be the way they have it set up. Now, what I want to do is arrive at a non-standard standard methodology where I can let power users do what they need to do, but not step on the code that I'm writing to try and keep everything else in order. So I've just got to have an agreement as to how this is going to occur. So long as the power users and I agree on this syntax, we're going to be fine. Here's my suggested method. Nothing magic about it. It's just, I've been using it for a long time. And it kind of works. I go to the power user and I say, look, I'll be happy to let you use your CUI. I'll be happy to let you use your programs. But I'm going to just give you this kind of backdoor way to do it. And we're just going to agree on how the files are named and where the files live. And as long as you do that, you'll be able to operate just exactly as you want. And I've never had power user argue about that. They're cool, fine. Yeah, they get the result they want. So what I say is, you put your code in a user.lsp file. Has to be named that, and it has to be in a file that AutoCAD, folder rather, that AutoCAD can actually find. So it's typically something that's in their local support directory, but the burden's on them, right? It has to be named that way, and it has to be in a place that AutoCAD can actually find it. They own this file. That's another point that I make, right? You put your code in there, you put it here, name it this way. I'll load it for you, but if anything in that code is screwed up, that's on you. Which I think is fair. And again, I've not really had anybody argue about it. So here's what I do. After I do all my standard stuff, I put that code in there. So what am I doing with that? I'm testing for the presence of user.lsp, and if I find it, I load it. Make sense? What am I doing here? Same logic with CUI. Let's branch that out even a little bit further. What am I doing here? Yeah, I'm loading their CUI and switching to a user-named workspace, which may be overkill, but for completeness, I just wanted to throw the example out there. This kind of lets me have my standards and lets the power users have their independence. Everybody seems to be happy. Everything's standardized as far as I'm concerned, so I've got no problem with it. Make sense to everybody? Let's try to get everything moved over to the network, with my goal being single point of support. If I could maintain everything off the server, then updating all 40 machines in 3 different offices would require me to maintain exactly how many sets of files? 1. Single point of control, that's the goal. So, what I do is I go to the user's machine once, and I put an ACAD doc LSP file on their machine that looks like that. If you look at what I'm doing in this code segment, I'm establishing a variable called Lisp Path. I'm pointing that off to an X drive and a specific folder. And obviously, you put whatever makes sense for you in there. Then in this segment, I say, if you find the file, and here I do strcat, or string concatenate, where I combine that path with the name init.lsp. So I am looking in what drive? X. What folder? AutoLISP. For which file? Init.lsp. And if I find it, I load it. Why do I like using the find file so much? Well, especially in this kind of logic, what happens when that laptop user unplugs from the network and goes out in the field? Where's the X drive? It's not there unless you got local files turned on, which I do like. by the way, but a lot of IT departments don't. The reason that I kind of evolved into this approach, because you can say, well, why have it as a variable, is because this way I can have a different variable for every version of AutoCAD. How many of you have different versions of AutoCAD you have to support? Yeah, that way I can have a Lisp Path 12, Lisp Path 13, so I can have different files load for different environments. Now, we take all of the code that we've been looking at so far, the set vars, the command lines, the functions, everything that we've done so far, we just take that code, put it over on the network in that init.lsp. Now when AutoCAD starts, what does it find? That. Which points it where? Network, which loads all the code. So in order for me to change or update my standardized code, I just modify init.lsp. Word of warning. Go ahead. Do you see a problem? We actually have all those core files on our network. So anytime anybody comes out, they pull. Do you see a problem with that? No, not necessarily. Yeah, I mean, you're going to have to go to the user's machine no matter what. You're going to have to go there once. You're either going to have to set a support directory so they can find it. You're going to have to go there once. Okay, yeah. Yep. Now, I don't suppose you've ever had users mess up their profile, have you? Okay. Because that's kind of where I'm going next. Essentially, I've now got it fairly well standardized. Here's another trick that I use, which I don't know how many of you use the visual Lisp editor or have ever really tried it. I've kind of gotten in a habit of using a specific text editor, so I don't really use it all that much to author code. But if you go to the just AutoCAD command line, type in VLIDE, you get the Visual Lisp Integrated Development Environment. Wow, it looks like that. And you can type code in here and save the code from there into files, and it has some cool stuff in it, like parentheses checker and drop down thing for your functions right there. But what I tend to use it for is once I get a Lisp file done, debugged, bulletproof, done, then I go into this and I compile it using the vlisp compile function. Here's the syntax, just open parent, vlisp-compile '*st, which means standard mode. You then put in the name of the LSP file that you wish to compile. Depending on the size of the Lisp file, it'll run for a few seconds. And the output you're going to get, in this case, it was myprog.lsp. You're now going to have a file sitting right next to it, myprog.fas. The FAS it's a fast load format, that's what it's called. It cannot be edited. It cannot be cracked. People can't get in there and fiddle with it, period. But neither can you. So what should you take definite care not to lose? The LSP file. And I'll restate that, right? There we go. So this now, you simply load this way. Right? See how the .lsp was replaced with the .fas? So you may want to put that in your user's ACAD doc to load the FAS. So now you're loading that secured file that can't be messed with. And here's another really cool benefit to that for me. That way I can work in the LSP file, debug and do all my work in the LSP file until I know I've got it right. Then I'll compile a new FAS, and then everybody's updated. You guys ever worked on a program that's live on a network? It's like changing a tire on a rolling car. It's kind of difficult to do. So that's a neat trick to kind of get around that. Okay. So that's basically, I've gone through all the different elements of the things I control at startup. Now we kind of want to shift gears a little bit entirely. And we want to look at actually managing the profile space of AutoCAD using Lisp. Now, AutoCAD profiles work. I'm not complaining that they don't work. But there can be any number of them on the machine. Users can create their own profiles that I don't know about. Users can mess up the profiles that I've made. I don't know that they're doing it, but they certainly can corrupt things. I've had them deleted. I've had people change paths for no good reason. And that this necessitates a trip to the machine to fix it. And I just don't want it to be broke. You know, and I don't want to have to go to the machine to mess with it. So what I'm going to do is look at ways that I can actually configure the machine using Lisp. Things that I want to look at are like plotter directories. Where do my plot styles reside? We already looked at CUI files. You know, I've got a mechanism for doing that. Where are my palettes located? Things like that. The good news is, in order for AutoCAD to run on the user's machine, AutoCAD has to have permission into their local profile space. And I'm talking about from the operating system's point of view. So the user has to be able to write these changes in and out of the profile, AutoCAD's profile. But where does AutoCAD's profile actually live? The registry. And that sounds scary immediately, doesn't it? It also sounds like something your IT department won't let you do. Well, the good news is Lisp gives us two functions that allow us to get and set AutoCAD variables that live in that little safetied part of the registry. It doesn't let us go in and change anything in the registry that we shouldn't be changing. It just lets us change the stuff that AutoCAD knows about. So this really is pretty safe. The worst thing that you're going to do is screw up your printer path. And then you just manually go fix it. But once you get the hang of it, it's actually pretty straightforward. The code's not complex at all. It's the registry detective work that will take you the time. So let's go ahead and see how that might work. And then I'll actually fire up AutoCAD and regedit, and we'll go ahead and spin through it and look. So basically what I'm going to do is go into regedit, get the registry open, and I'm going to dig my way down into the local user control stuff, and I'm going to find whatever the current profile is in the current version of AutoCAD. I then expand that folder. I drill down here into where it says General, and these are basically the things that tend to live on the Files tab of the Options screen. If we go ahead and expand that out, you're going to see stuff like this. Right? You then look through that listing of variables, and you can kind of see the names kind of do make sense, right? Like printer config dir. That's where your PC3 files live. But like all things in the registry, is it case sensitive? Oh yes, get one character wrong in any way, shape, or form, and this is not going to work. So careful notes here. Now what we can do is set a variable, right, with a set environment function call. If we wanted to get the value from a current profile in AutoCAD, that would be get environment. You really can't, I know the Autodesk guys cringe when I teach it, but you guys know what you're doing. So I'm not going to worry about it too much with you. Let's just hop over to AutoCAD real quick and have a look. And let's see. Okay, so here we go into the regedit. And what we're going to do is go to HKey current user, right? Because that's the stuff that the current user has access and permissions to. We're going to then scroll down through here and expand open software. Then we find Autodesk. Then depending on how many different versions of AutoCAD you have, you're going to find different keys under AutoCAD. So here's 19.1, which correlates to AutoCAD 2014, which is what I have open on the screen. You'll see in a minute. Then we make our way down here into Profiles. And there's the General tab right there, which I'll go ahead and click. And then we expose the various keys that the profile can access. How many of you have done this? A couple. Okay. can sometimes take a little bit of detective work. So let's just run through a real quick example here. Printer config dir. Well, I kind of think that's where my plotter definitions reside, kind of based on the folder that I see over here. But how could I prove it? We could just go to AutoCAD, bring up options, right? Files tab, and then we'll go down here and start looking for where our print definition stuff is, which always eludes me. And that value right there looks suspiciously like what we just saw in the registry, right? So that kind of proves it. If you're really having troubles finding one, you can always do something like this, right? You can add a path, and you can put in something just, really weird, like C:\junk or something like that. And that way that junk value will show up when you go into the registry editor and you can actually find it. So if you got a needle in a haystack scenario, that's not a bad way to figure it out. So if I went down to the command line here and I said get environment, let me put that up in a window here, it's a little easier for you to see, and I said printer config dir. Is that going to work? No. Well, number one, I haven't put a closing parenthesis, so now will it work? No. Nil would be the response. There we go, right? Now, what would happen if you had multiple folders? They would be concatenated together with semicolons. And one that you can see easily that illustrates that behavior would be the support path, right? Because there tends to be 5 or 6 support paths at any given time. So let me go ahead and key that in real quick. So that would be get env. And by the way, I'll give you some cheat codes on this. So they're in the handout too. So that's AutoCAD, all uppercase. And that comes back, and you can see here that there are semicolons, right, between each logical path. So back over to PowerPoint, hoping that I enter back in right about where I left off. What do you know? So here we would do a set environment to the printer config dir key, and I am sending it z\AutoCAD plotters for the folder. Would that work? Yes. But what would it do to any existing folders that were in that key? It would overwrite them. So a better solution would be to do something like the second example. So what I'm doing here is I am setting the printer config dir key to z:\AutoCAD plotters semicolon, right? Semicolon's key because we're going to add several paths together here. So semicolon, close that off, and then I add to that a get environment call on that same key. So literally what this function is doing is it's grabbing whatever's in that key and it's putting my path on the front of it and then writing it back into the key. Make sense? There's still a logical flaw in this. What is it? What if it were already in there? Exactly. If I leave this function just like that, and I do this every time AutoCAD starts up, what's going to happen the 100th time AutoCAD starts up? It's going to have 100 of these on the front of that. And at some point, we're going to hit the wall in terms of how many file folders that supports. I'm not aware of where that limit is, but at some point, we'll find it, I guess. So here's actually the best way to do it. like that. And I couldn't format it the way I wanted and get it to fit on the screen real well. So let me just kind of talk you through what I'm doing. I'm here using the wildcard match, or WC match, AutoLISP function, and I am saying, I want you to do a wildcard match for me. I want you to get what's in the current printer config dir key, and I want you to tell me, do you see z:\ACAD plotters semicolon in there? Make sense so far? WC match is going to look in there, and if the z:\ACAD plotters has already been added in, just 1 second. Yeah, just 1 second. If it's in there, that WC match is going to return a true. I only want to write it into the key if that's not true, correct? So I have done a not on this. So if there's a match, I will not write that. If there's not a match, I will. So I've seen a lot of people not use WC match before, and that whole not, two negatives is a positive thing can be kind of hard to think through. But syntactically, that's the best way that you can manage it. Now, yes?
If you get rid of that semicolon after the plotters, if they move that cat down at the bottom, you'll end up still with two in there, won't you?
No, because I see what you're asking, but the wildcard match is evaluating everything. I see what you're saying. If the user went in there and they took my path, which I put at the top, and they specifically moved it down to the bottom, then yes, the next time through I'd add it on again. But there's always going to be a user who's going to break it. Yeah, you're right. If I took the semicolon off that test, yeah, that's a good point. If I took the semicolon off that test, it really wouldn't matter where it was in the sequence. Yeah, good point. Thank you. Does this approach kind of sort of make sense? Now, here's the cool thing about this. Does it matter which profile the user is using right now? No, it is profile independent. So whichever profile they're in, this is going to work. If I put this in my init.lsp, then whenever AutoCAD starts, I'm going to make sure that my printer folders are set accurately, or whatever variables it is that I was trying to control. Here's kind of a cheat sheet for you, and that's in the handout, by the way, so you don't have to struggle to try and write that down. So the support path, just ACAD, the drive path, ACAD drive, printer config dir, the tool palette path, I find that one very useful to manipulate because you can have multiple tool palette path locations now. Yes? So his question was, is this really any quicker than, say, using an ARG file or something like the startup logic in the... Yeah, this will just, basically it's as fast as you can write to the machine in either case. What I don't like about using externalized ARG files is if that profile is already loaded, then you have to get rid of the profile before the ARG file will override it. I have no restriction like that here. So this... Basically, the user cannot possibly screw up where the printer definitions are or the plot styles or anything as far as I'm concerned. I point it off to a network so that I maintain all of those files globally in one network location. Same logic. Make sense? Yeah, and if your IT department, just tell them, look, I'm only operating in the same section of the registry where AutoCAD itself operates. I'm not doing anything that can blow the machine up. Don't worry. Yes? I'm sorry? LT you can't control this way. Yeah, simple fact of the matter because it's not there. Yeah. Now, I don't know if you guys know this, and I could get in trouble for saying it, but if you take a profile and you write it out to an ARG file, and rename it .reg, do you know what happens? Yeah, it is a registry file. And it will actually run, but watch your step. This thing works so much better because I only have two functions. The security is implied in the two functions. It automatically goes to whatever the current profile is, so I don't have to worry about it. And it works every single time it starts. I can now fully control profile variables without having to walk to the machine, which was the goal. So I find this to be a very useful way to manage things. Very useful. What do you guys think? Might be interested in trying that? Yes? Is that, I had trouble hearing you.
Do you ever create your own shortcut for AutoCAD, or is that all using the out-of-box shortcut?
I pretty much just use their shortcut, whatever it installs or whatever the user has, because I don't care what profile they're in. I'm just, as soon as the machine loads, whatever profile, whatever CUI they're in, doesn't matter. It's going to load the ACAD doc LSP. It's going to reach across the network, and it's going to do everything that I told it to do. So, yeah, I just don't have to mess with it anymore. Yeah. Yeah, enterprise menu would be the same thing, right there. Yeah. You can basically control everything. What I would just say as a kind of a word of advice is just stay in that. Remember I told you to look in that general tab? If you stay in there, you pretty much can't get in any real trouble. Let me go back here. Now, there are some things going on in some of these other areas, where it's looking at browser registry. There's some places in there where externalized DLLs are registered. If you have a vertical product like an AutoCAD architecture or something like that, yeah, I mean you could see some other externalized files that are registered, which would, some of those paths and things live in these other tabs. So from a CAD manager's point of view, if you stay in that general tab, you're pretty much just looking at the files tab of the options box, which is all under our command and control anyway. So it's hard to screw it up if you stay right in there. You are in the registry though, right? So that's the disclaimer. Once you figure out what keys it is that you need to manipulate, you'll never have to go in the registry editor again. So hopefully that kind of, where I lost it, there. So those are the ones that I typically just fiddle with right there as a cheat sheet. So just make sure you type them in the right way. That could be the worst thing that could happen to you. Okay, and we're going to start moving to close things out. It may actually get done a little bit early. So I think that really if I look at the available tools that I have to manage AutoCAD, how it starts up, how it's controlled, how it runs, how the profile environment is configured, I can't really, in my mind, I can't go out and buy any single tool that does anywhere near what a free AutoLISP interpreter does for me with a copy of Notepad. Extremely flexible, extremely powerful, costs zero. You can't beat that, right? So should every CAD manager know some Lisp? Yeah, I think so. And you can know just about this much, and you don't have to write real bang-bang design programs. You can get a lot of managerial horsepower out of it, even if you just know this. So when we get back from AU, I will take the slideshow, which I'll crunch down to a PDF. I'll have the handout for you again. I have some example files and a course guide that I did for a lab here at AU last year. And I will put all that in that one zip file for you. All you have to do is go back into your AU account, where you registered for your classes and where you found the handouts in the first place. And you can now download the uploaded stuff. I'll also go in through the instructor's interface. And when I get that stuff updated, I'll just send you a little email. Files have been updated and just a reminder about where you can go find it. Did everybody pick up a few things they could use? Okay, I know what's going to happen is we'll take questions and some people will start to leave. So let me go ahead and thank anybody in advance. Hope you had fun with this. Hope it was worth your while. If you want to contact me, please feel free. I left a bunch of my business cards on that back table if you want some. There's my email address. Feel free to come up and ask questions, guys. Thank you.